Well, the first thing is that you have to actually know what's already known about your topic. You can't just start from what you think. So it's important that you try and find out what's been done, but also evaluate it. So you've got to say to yourself, is this actually credible?
Partly because the literature review comprises a fairly big bit of the dissertation. Even in the sciences, you cannot get away without doing the literature review. And it's also because the other big bit is the discussion, and for the discussion you need to have raised some critical points in the literature review to then pick up in the discussion. So this will serve you really well for the whole thing. But the reason that the critical reading of the literature, rather than just reading and reporting it, is so important is it's the criticality that makes it final year as opposed to a second or first year level. It's the criticality that is scoring the top points. So a student who does a fairly descriptive literature review, they're showing me that they've done the legwork, they've done the actual reading, and you will get some marks for that labour. But to move it into the high 2-1 into the first, you need that criticality, because it's the criticality on top of doing the legwork that shows me that you've been able to interpret it, that you've understood it, that you've understood it well enough to be able to query it. You've understood it well enough to say, yeah, that's great, but they haven't looked at this angle or they haven't looked at this possibility.
By definition, what you're researching is to some extent new, so it's really important that you can trust the information that you're basing your research in and that you can present it with confidence. It's also really important because critical reading, critical analysis is one of the key skills that you'll develop as part of your final year project module. So that's something you can definitely show to employers afterwards. You can say, I evaluated these sources. I realised that some of them were actually just citing each other circularly and hadn't done their own research, or I felt that some of them were superficial, or I realised quickly that certain academics in the field had a particular argument with each other. So that's a way of showing your critical independence. It's also important because we've got a vast array of material available to us nowadays, including what we call grey materials, so sources that aren't peer reviewed but may actually be very valuable for your work. So it's particularly important that you know how to approach those sources. It's not that you can't use them, but you must use them in the correct way.
So when you start looking into the literature, it's really important that you understand what's already been undertaken in your area, and actually think about why people have taken certain studies or taken certain approaches to those studies, and try and distill out of that some of the things that have worked well, things that haven't worked so well, why that may be. And if you can sort of look at it from a critical point of view, that should help guide you and direct you in some of your work.
So it's really important for the students to critically read sources, because what they're looking to do in the dissertation is to contribute in some way to the literature that they're reviewing. It's not just that they need to understand that literature, but that they need to position or situate what they're doing in their dissertation within that. And the only way they can do that really is by analysing quite carefully the readings that already exist. So what are the limitations of those studies, what are the things they focus on, the things they don't so much, what have the studies already done in that particular area and what have they not done. Only by going through that process can the student really say, what I'm trying to do in this dissertation is this particular thing that somehow contributes to the literature. That contribution doesn't need to be huge. Not expecting students to have a major breakthrough necessarily in the dissertation they're doing, but it does need to in some way show that kind of critical awareness of the literature that only comes through reading the sources critically.
Something that we really need to encourage students to do is to be critical in the way they read literature around their project. This is really important because they shouldn't be just taking what they read at face value. They need to think about, is that relevant to what I'm doing? Also think about sources that don't necessarily agree with what they're doing. They need to look at contradicting views as well, so that they're making a more sort of rounded judgment on the work that they're doing. I think it's really important that you don't end up with just confirmation bias, where you're only finding sources that agree with you. It's quite easy to fall into that trap. So it's really sort of keeping an open mind and really interrogating those resources, using the knowledge you already have, and really sort of questioning what you're reading, not just taking it at face value.